Hi, I'm Dan Lutz, and you're watching for BassPlayersOnly.com.
Hi, and welcome to ForBassPlayersOnly.com. I'm John Liebman, founder and first baseman. You know, a lot of people think they're too old or it's too late for them to learn how to play an instrument. So I created ForBassPlayersOnly.com for adults who want to learn to play bass, because I believe you're never too old and it's never too late to experience the joy and the pleasure of making music. For BassPlayersOnly.com, let's play bass. My guest this week is Dan Lutz. Dan is a great upright player. He's a great electric player, and he does it all: jazz, rock, pop, R&B, gospel, soul. He's done sessions for commercials, movies, TV, a whole bunch of Broadway shows in LA. And he has worked with everyone from Patti Austin, Jonathan Butler, Josh Grobin, Larry Klein, Oleta Adams, to Michael Buble, Vinnie Colaiuta. I love Vinnie. Robin Ford, Kirk Whalum, Brian Auger, and the list just goes on and on. This is the first time we've had him on For Bass Players Only. So welcome, Dan. How are you?
Good, thank you. How you doing, John?
Good, thank you. It's good to have you here.
I love doing this stuff. Thank you.
Oh, great. I want to start from the beginning and talk about your musical upbringing. Where are you from originally?
I'm originally from Philadelphia.
Ah, okay. Quite a rich musical heritage in Philadelphia.
Yeah, we have a lot of family back east and just the outskirts of Philly. And I moved out to LA with my family when I was about 13 and really started playing bass here. But I like to claim my Philly roots because that bass heritage is thick.
Well, I think who's from the Gerald McBride and Gerald Beasley
Yep.
and the Heath brothers, aren't they from?
Yeah, I think so. A
Jimmy
lot of great musicians.
Yeah. I think, didn't Nathan East start out in Philly before he went out to San Diego?
He may have. He may have. Yeah.
Well, so tell me about your initial exposure to music. It sounds like it was more out. Where'd you say you moved when you were 13?
We grew up in Orange County, California.
Okay.
Just south of LA. My father was a choral director and really into Broadway. And so I grew up, going to his choral concerts and watching him conduct. He used to take me to Broadway shows back when I was a little kid. And then he took a brief moment and started producing dinner theaters. And so they would have these variety shows, and I would love to go because I would sit next to the rhythm section and watch these guys play all these different styles of music. And it was really fun and eye-opening. And at the same time, I was about in 6th or 7th grade, and I was playing the bass in jazz band. And then I'd go to his dinner theater and watch these guys play rock, pop, Broadway, ballads, and I was just enamored with it. And
you were playing upright or electric in the band?
At the time, I was playing electric bass.
Okay.
And I was playing a little bit of upright in the school orchestra, but I didn't really start playing jazz upright until about 10th grade.
Okay, I want to get to that. But when you say choral director in California, does the name Roger Wagner mean anything to you?
Sure. Yeah.
Well, I did a tour of Japan and Korea with the Roger Wagner Chorale. That was quite an experience.
Yeah, that's legit. And my father, I believe he sung in the Orange County Master Chorale, which is also a similar organization. That's cool.
It was really cool because it was 20 singers, a piano player, and me on upright bass.
Nice.
The conductor was actually Roger's daughter. It was pretty close to the end of his life, I think.
Wow.
And so he was still alive, but he wasn't well enough to make the tour. And she did it. I think her name was Janine. Anyway, I climbed Mount Fuji. I went to the Blue Note. I went to the Blue Note in Osaka and also in Tokyo. Gerald Albright. Well, it's the third Gerald I mentioned. But okay, so go on. How did you were exposed to a lot of stuff, the Broadway and the classical stuff and the choral stuff, and then the dinner theater is when you started to get more exposed to rock and pop and that sort of thing?
Yeah, and my band director at the time was a guy named Richard Watson, and he was a drummer, is a drummer, and he really turned me on to like Tower of Power and different soul and R&B bands, and then also through his program, which was very strong, I auditioned for and made the Southern California All-State Jazz Band. And so I was in that and I met a lot of people and I really started to develop that. And then as a senior in high school, I played in the Cal State Fullerton's lab band, their big band. And we toured. And one of the jazz festivals that we did as a senior was the University of North Colorado in Greeley, their jazz festival, where I met some people from North Texas.
Okay, I was waiting for you to say North Texas. Okay.
Yeah. And at North Texas, and then they offered me a scholarship from that festival, and so I ended up going there and studying at North Texas right out of high school, and that was really when I kind of dove into jazz specifically, and really kind of honed my skills there and learned so much from that school.
Right. Was Mark Johnson there when you were there?
Mark Johnson was before me. But there were some great musicians there when I was there, specifically, some great drummers in New York named Ari Honig and Keith Carlock, who are now, quite famous. Yeah. So I used to go and play with those guys and hang out and learn so much. Yeah, it was great.
There was a classical teacher. I think his name was Ed Rainbow. Was he there when you were there?
That doesn't sound familiar. Ed Soap was the drum instructor. John Adams and Fred Hamilton were the bass instructors. Just awesome guys.
Dan Hurley there, or am I going way back?
I think you might be going a little earlier. I was there in the early 90s, like mid 90s. So,
was Neil Slater there when you were there?
Yes. Okay. Neil Slater and Seth Riggs were the two like band directors, and I met a lot of guys, a lot of drummers specifically, who actually moved out back to LA when I did. So now I still have a lot of good relationships with some studio drummers that were there at the time, and then our paths have crossed in the studio here in Los Angeles. So it was a great breeding ground for great musicians.
So would I be putting you on the spot if I asked you what band you were in? 1 o'clock?
Oh, well, at the time, I think there were 9 bands, 9 big bands, and each big band had 2 rhythm sections. And so I was I think at that time, I was there for my freshman year. And I made the 8 o'clock and I believe the 7 o'clock. So I was in one of 14 rhythm sections over there. I wasn't in the top bands, but I did get the opportunity to play in a group called the Zebras.
And that was Dan Hurley's group.
Yeah. And Dan Hurley and I had a great relationship. He was one of my favorite teachers. He really believed in me. And so as an electric bass player, I got to be in the Zebras for both semesters, and that was really cool because I got to play with some great drummers and great keyboard players there. So I was doing my upright stuff in the big bands and then my electric stuff in the Zebras. And then I also had a Latin group called La Tribu, and we played at a local bar called Cool Beans every Tuesday. So I really got to do a little bit of both there as well. So I had a great experience there. It was really fun.
Great. I thought the Zebras was an ensemble of keyboard players. Hence
it is.
Zebras. Okay.
Yep, it is, with a rhythm section. Yeah.
And I always hear about a place called Benny's.
Oh, you know what? I don't know if Benny's was around when I was there. We had there was a Karma Cafe and Cool Beans and the Flying Tomato and a few other places. That's where Snarky Puppy came. Yeah.
Oh, okay. You're making me feel very old, Dan. I mentioned it because that was one of the schools that I looked at. I looked at Berkeley, and I looked at Indiana University and Eastman and North Texas Musicians Institute out in LA. And I settled on University of Miami. That one just hit the spot for me.
So, that's wonderful school. I have some good friends that went there. That's great.
Yeah, probably long after I did so. So how did your career get rolling?
Well, I was at North Texas, like I said, and I realized that a lot of people who were graduating from there were either going to the East Coast or the West Coast.
Yeah.
I also realized, and I realized too that a lot of the music business was about relationship and being in those cities. And so I kind of clicked with me that I wanted to live in LA. So why not go back there? and just start working. So I transferred to Cal State Northridge, which is up in northern LA, and that's where things really started clicking. I ended up my first big gig, believe it or not, was in a variety show for Tony Danza from Who's the Boss. He had a basically a Vegas act, and we toured around. We did Vegas and Atlantic City and Chicago and different things, and it was a story about his life. But I had to audition and play, electric and also sing backgrounds. But I loved that gig because I got to tour, and it was like it was professional. It felt really cool as a 20-year-old, playing in that stuff. But at Cal State Northridge, I was in a group with some great musicians, and we just started doing gigs and jazz gigs here and there. And eventually, it started to work up where I was in like a top 40 band, and I was doing swing music was really popular at the time. I was in a swing band that was working all the time. And gradually those circles started to spin, and I started to just do more and more work, until eventually I landed a gig with Brian Auger, who you mentioned is a wonderful organ player.
Yeah.
And we started to do albums and tour Europe, and that kind of exposure connected me with a few other artists like Jonathan Butler, who I started working with in the early 2000s. And yeah, and so it just kind of, like in LA, if you're a good player and you're a professional and you're on time and you can play, people want to work with you. And so I just started doing that. And I also really enjoyed teaching, and I also enjoyed playing shows and doing sessions. And so I kind of had this sort of diversity to my career, I guess you could say, where if I wasn't touring all the time, I was in town and I was doing shows or teaching. And so I think that diversity has kind of held me together, where I don't just do one thing. I'm not just a jazz bass player. I don't just tour. I don't just play shows, but I kind of have my hand in a few different things. And I love that part about being a bass player and trying to fit in and make everybody sound good, no matter what genre or style it is.
Oh, I like that. Bass players make other people sound good. Other people
Yeah,
have said that. I said, yeah, that's true. That's what
that's
we
true.
do. Do,
Yeah,
do you play any keyboard bass or anything like that, or
I
just
do. Yeah, I do play. I learned piano when I was very young, and there's been a few gigs where I've had to play some synth bass and do that. So I've got a little keyboard that works well. Although I'm kind of more into creating those sounds with like an octave and some fuzz or something, and with the dry tone rolled off. And I kind of like to do that too. But sometimes people like the look of a synth bass, and so I do that as well if it's needed. Yeah.
because you remind me the diversity is it's funny because the jazz people tend to be able to play everything for some reason, not just jazz. I tell the story sometimes when I was at University of Miami, I played in the orchestra, and we were playing a Stravinsky piece, Petrushka. And the conductor called everybody in the orchestra into his office one at a time to play excerpts, and he would say, "Play this, play this," and play stuff. It's 5/8, 7/8, 3/4. Let's get all these meter changes, and I nailed it, right. So
Yeah.
he says, "Are you a jazz major?" I said, "Yes, I am." He says, "I thought so." He says, "You jazz guys can play anything, whereas as opposed to just being just with blinders on, and this is what I want to do." And it's funny that they call it a jazz curriculum because there's rock, there's all those genres that I rattled off that you do at the beginning.
Yeah, so true. I am so thankful that I studied jazz. In fact, after Cal State Northridge, I got to go and get my master's and study with Charlie Hayden at Cal Arts.
Oh,
And
that's right. He was at Cal Arts. Yeah.
yeah, and it was so good. Like I know it was jazz, but just having that understanding of harmony and how to work with other musicians and other players, and even in a larger context, not just traditional jazz, but free jazz and improvising in the moment. I really feel like that informed and shaped how I go in if I'm trying to do a pop project or something. Like, it's really I love being creative, and I love working with other musicians in the moment to create something that's unique instead of sort of regurgitating, oh, this is what you play, this is stock. So I always try and bring my own little flavor in, and that all has come from studying jazz and improvisation and trying to be your own voice and have your own voice.
free music, free jazz. All I can say is it's a lot more fun to play than it is to listen to. That's my take on it.
For the most part, I kind of agree. Yeah, yeah.
Ornette Coleman. Okay, I can hang on for a little bit, but
Yeah.
I did have the privilege of interviewing Charlie Hayden on
Oh,
Bass Players Only. I don't
wonderful.
remember. Well, he's been gone quite a while, so it was I think a
Yeah,
couple of years before that, and
yeah.
it's really enlightening. I have that on. I don't know if I have the audio from that or just a transcribed text, but it's on for Bass Players Only. If any of you watching want to check it out, go to forbassplayersonly.com, put in Charlie Hayden in the little search thing, and it'll come right up.
Love it.
So, what's keeping you busy now, Dan? What are you doing?
Yeah, sure. Well, I stopped. I think most of us stopped touring in around 2020 when things shut down.
Yeah.
I was the music director and bass player for Jonathan Butler, who's a great artist, wonderful guy, still a good friend. And I had toured with him for about 12 years. And I had also done some touring with a great vocalist named Liz Wright and Melody Gardot, two great jazz vocalists. But in 2020 and 2021, that kind of stopped. And so I kind of shifted, whether I did it or life did it, shifted more towards sessions, which I had been doing before, but I started to do more film sessions. So I'm really kind of brushing up on my arco playing and getting that going. But this past probably year and a half, I played on the Coming to America 2 soundtrack. I played on a HBO Max series called Gremlins, which is like a reboot of the 80s stuff. I just finished The Beanie Bubble with Zach Galifianakis and Elizabeth Banks. I played on a Netflix show called Happiness is Everywhere, I believe, and a bunch of little random things like a TV streaming stuff. And some of those are orchestra dates. Some of those are rhythm section dates. And that's been great. In addition to those sessions, I also do quite a few Broadway shows here in Los Angeles at the Pantages Theater. And so I'll jump in on, I did Hamilton, Moulin Rouge, Wicked, Frozen. I'm about to do Aladdin in a couple of weeks. I start Aladdin and then Mamma Mia. So that's been great. And like I mentioned, the diversity, I love being creative, and I love playing jazz, and I love doing sessions and albums where we're all kind of creating in the moment. But I also love playing a show where you have to be sort of perfect every night and the same thing, 8 shows a week. And that scratches a different itch as a musician to try and really be great, and nail something with the same tone and consistency. So I love doing that, and being in the pit with some of the best musicians in LA is so fun. So we have a great time, and it's a great hang. So between that and the occasional teaching thing, or sometimes I'll go out and do like a show, like a one-off or a fly date or something like that. And then being a dad, my hands are busy with all that stuff.
Yeah, you bring back a lot of happy memories. I did a lot of the Broadway stuff.
Oh, cool.
Was in Miami. I did the national tour of Into the Woods. So I toured with Cleo Lane. It was cool. Stephen Sondheim came to the rehearsals, and it was a big.
He's my favorite. Yeah.
I did a lot at the Burt Reynolds Theater, and all the orchestra pits. I shouldn't say this publicly, but that's where I got really good at crossword puzzles.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, exactly. There is some downtime.
Yeah. Well, as a bass player, you can generally keep pretty busy during a show, but long scenes in between, and other guys would bring in headphones, listen to the football games, and so.
Yeah, totally.
One conductor says, "Now I don't object to reading material in the orchestra pit, as long as you don't take a newspaper and open it up like that."
I have some stories that I won't share, but you're right. There
I've
are
had a few as well. but you talk about trying to be on every show 8 times a week, the exact same thing. A lot of people got bored of that or tired of that. I didn't. I liked it. I liked doing it. Again and again. I played Les Mis. They called me in as a sub in Detroit, actually, because the bass player happened to be the assistant conductor. And somebody said, hey, there's a guy in town that can do this. So they called me and I did it once and they called me back and they called me back. And I did it like 40 times, I think.
Wow.
And that's that show, no crossword puzzles during that show. You don't have a second to breathe. And it's all, there's not one spoken word of dialogue. It's all must be Javert.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And and now we're in A, now we're in D, now we're in B flat, and a 1 2 1 2 3 4 5 6, and a 1 2 3 1 2. It's and when you're coming in, you don't have the advantage of the rehearsals. They just threw me in. I'm like,
that's exciting.
Must have done a good job because they called me back.
Yeah, right on.
Fiddler on the Roof with Theodore Bacall. I mean, such a variety of shows. They're all like Dream Girls. What's that beautiful piece of art over your shoulder there, Dan?
That's my latest favorite bass. I've been with G&L Guitars for probably 3 or 4 years now, maybe more. I have the usual 62P bass from Fender, and I have these great instruments. But G&L, I kind of wanted to have. There's a few reasons I started playing them. Number one is because their factory is in Fullerton, and I grew up in the neighboring city of Placentia. And so and they started around the same time I moved to California, the early 80s. And they're basically Fenders, but I feel like it's Leo just took a few little things that he did and kind of improved upon his design, I think. Like the bridge and the end pins, or not the end pins, but the whatever you call on the headstock, I forget their name, but they're tapered, and some of their pickup design is just a little bit more aggressive sounding. I'm essentially a passive bass guy. I have one bass with active electronics, which I love, but I really enjoy passive instruments and just playing how they sound. They sound how they are. You just have a few knobs. I'm not a knob tweaker guy. I just like it really simple. But I stayed away from G&L for a long time because their string spacing was so tight. I didn't like the 17.5 millimeter or whatever. It hadn't been my thing. However, in the last few years, they have developed a new line called the Series 750, and the 750 stands for 3/4 spacing, or 19 millimeter string spacing. And that's what you see behind me. This is an L1000, which is essentially like a P bass, but it's got 19 millimeter string spacing. So that really opened up the world to me, because I could finally get my hands around a wider spacing P bass. And the cool thing about the L1000 is that it has a 3-way switch. So even though you just have one pickup, you can run it series, parallel, or what I like to call this steroids setting, which is just like an enhanced low, beefier tone. And so it's got a little versatility in there, not like a P bass, but it has got 3 different options. Essentially, in my mind, that I think it's in series there, it sounds sort of like a Music Man, because it's got that aggressive sort of thinner sound, but growly. And then in the center position, I guess would be parallel, it sounds like a normal P bass. And then in the third position, it sounds like a fattened up, thicker P bass. And I love it. I have 2 of these basses. This one is my custom shop one that they did with a fancy flake, heavy metal flake sunburst finish, and black blocks, and a beautiful headstock. So I really love this bass, and they've been great. They've been really, I needed something that felt like a Fender, that felt like home, but had a little bit of more improvements and a little more versatility. And G&L's just hit the mark for me.
It's like the next generation of Fender.
Yeah, it really is. And the guys are great down there, and the fact that they're an hour away from me, and they really like to hear my opinions about the instruments. And I have this bass, I have another one that's different woods, and then I've got a SB1, which is basically their P bass, but with the MFD pickups, which is the magnetic field design pickups. And then I also have a jazz bass from them, which is, I guess they call it a JB1, and that has some prototype pickups that Leo Fender himself was developing, and so they've been generous to let me hold on to that. But it's really cool. They have their MFD jazz pickups in there, which I love.
Very cool. Well, I agree. They are great people, and they invited me down one time several years ago. I took the whole tour of the place,
Yeah.
and Leo Fender's desk as he left it on the last day of his life. And I have a picture of myself sitting there. They let me,
Yeah, me too. It's so cool to be a part of that, to experience that, what he was doing, and all his little tricks that he did to design pickup placements, and what, he was always innovating. And he's awesome. I'm so thankful for him.
Aren't we all?
Yeah.
What about the rest of your gear? What kind of strings do you play?
You know what? I have been an Elixir bass string user forever, and I'll tell you why. Because I have sweaty hands. I don't know what it is. I don't have a problem with, or maybe I should say I have acidy hands. I don't have wet palms, but if I play a gig that maybe 2 gigs later, the strings are significantly more dead. And I remember going on tour with Brian Auger. We were about to do a 30 show tour over about 34 days. And somebody handed me some elixirs, some coated strings. And I was like, okay, I'll try them. And they lasted me the whole tour. And I could not believe, and they still sounded great when I came home. And I could not believe that for a little bit more money, it would last so long. So I have been with Elixir probably since the late 90s. And they have been so cool. I've done some videos for them, and I have them on almost all of my basses that wear and nickel, essentially, or stainless steel. I have some basses that wear flats that I don't change, but most every one of my basses is Elixir strings. I use Dunlop flats. I love Daryl Anders over at Dunlop, and he's been really generous with me.
Yep.
And with pedals and also with strings. So if I'm using flats, I use Dunlop flats. But I love Elixir, and they don't have a lot of variety in their lineup in terms of bass strings, but they last for me, and they sound great. I'm not a bright, shimmery bass player. I don't need that slap and pop stuff all the time. And if I do, I'll throw on a set of super brights or something like that. But for me, I love nickel. I just like that it's kind of the middle of the road. It's not too bright or, clangy, but it's also not dead. And Elixir just is right on for me there. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite amp that you like to play through?
Yeah, honestly, I'm no longer, well, I guess I don't know if I'm with them, but for years I used Aguilar. I loved their tube stuff way back in the day, and then for years I played their DB750, which was that huge sort of tube amp. And then I got an AG700, which is sort of their digital version, and I love it. And I still have an AG500 dual channel, which I use to this day. So I kind of use Aguilar, and then I have a Walter Woods bass amp.
I have a Walter Woods.
Yes, I have a Walter Woods that's one of the first ones that he made. My band director gave it to me as a gift. It's a 2-channel. It's only about 200 watts. I think it's like serial number 3 or 4. It's really cool. It's a favorite piece of mine. It still sounds unbelievable, and I use it all the time, especially for upright stuff. So I use that. And then for cabinets, it's changed so much for bass players. We used to have to lug around 410s with wheels and all this thing. And now a lot of the times I'm using in-ears, and I don't even really have a cabinet. But when I do, I don't know if you're familiar with Roger Bear, and he has this Bear cabinets. It's just basically a super 112 with a mid, and it sounds wonderful. It doesn't have a tweeter, but it just has this crazy awesome sound, and I love that cabinet. And then I also use a little tiny Ampeg 210, that mini fridge looking thing.
Yeah.
And I use that in the studio all the time, because when you're miking up just 110, it really captures that closed back, no ports, just a nice aggressive rock sound. So I kind of use those two things for when I'm playing out. and doing that. And then I just sold a bunch of pedals. I had all these different pedals, and I really kind of just transitioned to the Line 6 HX Stomp, because I can, for me and what I'm doing, we're going back to the diversity, but I love the HX Stomp in that I can create multiple pedal boards for shows, for gigs, for sessions, all in one unit really, really fast. And that has been so cool for me to be able to, oh, I'm doing a show with this, or I'm doing a fly date with this artist. I need an octave, a chorus, and an overdrive. Great. That's all in this unit. Or I'm doing a Broadway show and they're calling for fuzz and synth and this and that. And then I can just create that and call it right up. So I use that in conjunction with a Nordstrand Audio Starlifter bass preamp, which I love for upright or electric. Although I'm really a mic only on the upright bass if I can help it. So that's kind of my setup. I don't have a specific cabinet, but I do love the Aguilar amps and the Walter Woods and the Elixir strings and the Line 6 stuff.
I've interviewed over 800 bass players, and we
Wow.
generally, a lot of times we talk about gear. There was only one other person, I think, that mentioned the Walter Woods, Ed Lucy, on the faculty of Berklee College of Music.
Sure.
And I bought mine in, I think, 1980. And
wow.
My mother said, "You paid how much for that?"
Right. Yeah.
I still use it. I used it last week.
It's amazing.
He invited me to his house, and I think somebody said he might have died. I don't know.
No, I don't think he passed yet, but I also went to his house because he lives out here in Indio.
Okay. It was somewhere up in the mountains near I can't even remember the part. I don't know. It was a beautiful Saturday morning. I went with my buddy when we were on tour. We were out in LA somewhere, and yeah, very, very nice guy.
Yeah, he's a legend. And I remember I had bought a few amps from him before, but he lives near Palm Springs, and or at least he did when I went out there. And it was great. And he just makes his own stuff, and even to try and fix some Walter Wood stuff is hard to get done, but it lasts so long, and he was just such an innovator. Yeah. So I love it. That tone is amazing.
Sure. Boy, I could geek out on this stuff all day. But I want to ask you, you mentioned several times that you teach, you're an educator. For Bass Players Only is a bass instruction site. So I've got people from pretty much all over the world, almost all 50 states and, I don't know, 50, 60 countries worldwide, coming to For Bass Players Only every day to learn bass.
Wow.
And most of the people that I'm attracting tend to be men in their 50s, 60s, 70s. They're not career bound. They just want to play maybe some classic rock riffs with their buddies or some blues shuffles, maybe walking bass, and not too much on the upright, but, rock, electric, classic rock. Yeah. I get some women too, but I say that just to give you some context, because I wanted to ask you what advice you have for somebody like that who wants to learn bass. What do you think they should be thinking about?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that a huge part of my education early on, and to this day, it's never changed, is really being able to listen well to different bass players. So I love, there's a difference between hearing music and listening to music, right? And when I listen to, if I'm trying to learn something or cop a sound or a feel or a style, I love to put headphones on and listen to what the bass player is doing. And I think of a few things. I think of, number one, what bass is he probably playing, or she? Is it a P bass? Is it a jazz? Is it a dark tone? Is it a bright tone? Are they playing with their fingers, a pick, or their thumb? Are they muting? And then once I kind of figure that out, then I go back and I listen again. And I'm like, what's the relationship of the bass line to the drums? And are they playing together? Are there syncopations? Is it a 2-bar pattern? Is it a 4-bar bass line? What kind of stuff? And then I unpack it even further and I say, what's the relationship of the bass to maybe the melody, or to the guitarist, or the organ? And then where is in the range of the bass are they playing? And you can like write an essay if you just go back and listen each time. So with different like motives or different goals. So for anybody that's learning bass that wants to get into it, that and if they want to get a little bit beyond just playing the notes, go in with that mentality. Like, what are you learning today? I'm learning a bass line from the Eagles or something like that. And Timothy Schmidt's one of my favorite. He's amazing. And the fact that he could sing and play like that is incredible. But you go in and you're like, what is he playing? Why did he choose that note? Where is he being melodic versus just rhythmic? And you can really discover a lot and educate yourself if you do that across a few different bass players and a few different genres. So if you get advanced with Jocko, you obviously know what he's mostly playing, a jazz bass 4-string. Rocco was kind of the P bass 4-string guy, and he used techniques like 16th notes and syncopation and octaves and muting that was different than Jamerson, who was playing with one finger and always improvising and moving his harmony around in relationship to the melody and the lyrics and whatnot, versus Pino Palladino, who is plays. He's arguably one of my favorites. In fact, Pino is one of those bass players that has had the top gig in multiple genres, whether it's Erykah Badu or John Mayer or Herbie Hancock or The Who. Like, he just like gets the best gigs in the top of every genre across the board. Amazing bass player, but he's the same in every aspect, in every playing situation. He still plays like Pino. And what does he bring to the table? So kind of diving in, I think if you're in your 40s, 50s, 60s, and you're starting to learn bass and you want to go a little bit beyond just playing the notes, ask yourself those questions. What kind of bass is it? How is he getting that tone? Are they playing on top or behind? What's their relationship to the lyrics or the melody of that song? What's their relationship to the guitarist in that song versus just the drums? And you can kind of develop your own voice if you ask those questions and really kind of get into it. And it's a fun study to see what the relationship and the role of the bass player is in those different settings.
I love it. I must be a real bass geek because this stuff really excites me.
Yeah, me too.
A lot of them are asking for more music theory and knowing how to learn songs and navigating the bass fingerboard without getting lost if they get above the 5th fret or the 7th fret. Any comments about those things?
Yeah, I think for technique and stuff, there's a few things you can do. But I remember my early bass teacher would tell me that before I could do anything, I had to find a note 3 different places on the bass, and not octaves, but the same note in the same register in 3 different places. And that was really huge for me because where is this note? Obviously, low E only exists one place, but you could find a low G, a few different places, and then you move up the register of the bass, and you can find these different notes because you have to go on different strings to find the same note. And then he would make me play scales using a pattern, and then he would make me move that pattern somewhere else. And as I played those scales, I had to say every note out loud. So I would watch my hand and I would, G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G, and I would watch where those are so that eventually I could train myself. And I had to do that in all 12 keys in 2 different places every time, saying every note. Now that's monotonous at first, but what it does is you memorize where that F sharp is on the A string versus the D string versus the G string, and you know where those octaves are. So that would be a great, always, if you're learning a bass line, try and play it in 2 different places and say the notes as you're playing them, because if you can get familiar with that middle part of the bass specifically across the strings, like 4th, 5th fret all the way across to from the E to the D, you can really open up your vocabulary. And the added benefit is that it's easier to play up there, and you expand your technique and your speed and your ability to get around the bass instead of always being down, in first position or half position.
Careful now, careful. You don't want to get up here and get in trouble for not being down here where you
That's true. Yeah, you be a
Depends on
bass.
the context. You mentioned Jocko and a couple of others. So
Yeah.
that is golden what you just said. That is, I'm going to try that myself.
Yeah, I all still, you know, a lot of times if I'm in a recording session or in a show specifically, I have to take some of these passages and just figure out, is this the best place for me to play this? Because a lot of times in a show, the pit is dark and you can't see. And if you make one little mistake and then you scare yourself, then you know you're kind of off the rails for a little bit. So being able to play something on in the right place where everything makes the most sense and the economy of motion is maximized, then
Yeah.
you can really improve your playing. And I have luck after playing for 20 some years, I have a lot of muscle memory. So I know where notes are and I don't have to look. I know what a minor third feels like. I know what a fifth feels like and all that. So when you're playing, I kind of use a lot of that muscle memory. I know, you know, if I'm playing pinky, you know, then I know that my first finger is going to catch a major third or a minor third, and my second finger has a major third and a fourth and a sharp fourth and a fifth. So I know in relationship to where I'm fingering where my other notes are if I'm reading. So that helps a lot too. But you really have to get familiar with that middle section of the bass. So make yourself play everything you do in two different positions.
Awesome. Awesome. What about the future, Dan? What else do you have coming up that either something that's in the works and coming up or something that you've always wanted to do and just haven't gotten around to yet?
Yeah, well, you know, I in 2020, when all the work, I was supposed to be doing Hamilton at the Pantages, and it all shut down like that week. And so I ended up starting just like grabbing a bass and noodling and playing different songs from my childhood or songs that meant, you know, something to me. I try and figure out solo bass versions of the songs. And out of that came four little singles that I released, and they're on iTunes and Spotify. They're streaming everywhere. I did a version of I'm on Fire by Bruce Springsteen that meant a lot to me. I did that as a duet with a drummer friend of mine in town. And then I did a version of Head Over Heels by Tears for Fears, where I kind of play the melody and I have a keyboard and drums on that. I did a string arrangement of Maybe from Annie. I played the melody and a chordal version of that.
I played
And
that. Oh, that was a lot of fun.
yeah. And then I did a standard called In a Sentimental Mood with a drummer friend of mine, Aaron Sterling. And I did a duet with myself on upright and electric. So I did these duets and I recorded them and I put them out just for fun. And that's inspired me to record some more. So currently and in the future, I'm going to be doing a duo project with a great jazz pianist in town named Josh Nelson. And I'm just going to be playing some upright and he's going to play acoustic piano. And we're just going to record some duets. And that'll be coming out next year. And then I do a lot of sessions with a drummer named Victor Indrizzo, who's wonderful. He's played with Sheryl Crow and Alanis Morissette and Macy Gray and all these great players. And a guitarist named David Levita, who's currently touring with Tim McGraw. And we do a lot of rhythm section stuff and studio stuff with different producers. And so we're going to be recording a bunch of groove-oriented improvisational sort of rhythm section stuff that I'll be putting out later in the year too. So I've kind of got this itch, you know, as I approach 50 to be myself as an artist and represent and put out what I do and how I think about jazz and how I think about groove and rhythm sections and also just kind of lyrical improvisational playing. So the stuff that kind of came out of 2020, these little solo pieces or duets that I did, inspired me to create some more. So in addition to the Broadway shows and some touring and things like that, I want to do some stuff that's more artistic. And so I feel like I have a voice on the instrument now, and I have some ideas together. So I'm going to put that out and see what people think. I'm not trying to do it to be famous or be an artist, you know, and have a solo career, but I just want it to be part of like my sound and who I am and represent, you know, what I've learned thus far.
Oh, that's awesome. That creative outlet just sounds so
Yeah.
healthy.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Pantages a couple of times. I've played some shows there when I first got to LA. With I was playing with the Chiffons on a show with Gary Puckett in the Union Gap and Paul Revere and the Raiders.
Woo! Awesome. That
Awesome.
sounds great.
No, but I really love what you said about the duos and the upright, the electric, the rhythm section stuff. Keep us posted on that stuff. I'd really love to hear it. I'm sure
Absolutely.
it's great.
Absolutely.
What would you be if you were not a bass player? Something outside of music.
Outside of music?
Yeah.
You know, I used to want to be an eye doctor when I was really young, but I think I am wired to I think I'm wired to be like an encourager and an educator in many ways. My dad was, his mother was, my grandma. And I love connecting with people and pushing them to be something better than they are, or help them through something, navigate stuff. I've been always really into family. I never wanted to be a famous bass player. I always wanted to be able to have a family and play music, if that makes sense. So I kind of grew up around that environment where it was more about educating and helping and encouraging people and getting them from point A to point B. So I think if I wasn't playing bass, I'd probably be teaching or something like that, helping others, maybe counseling, or just trying to get people from being stuck to, living a life that means something.
It sounds like you grew up in a great environment, and I just have a feeling you're a great dad.
I'm trying to be. I have great kids and a beautiful wife. So if I can hold that together for the rest of my life, I'll be happy.
I'm sure you will. Well, thanks so much for joining me today, Dan. I really appreciate it. You've got some great stories, and I wish you all the luck in the world, much luck and continued success, and look forward to meeting you in person, hopefully one day soon.
That would be great. Thank you, John, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. You're watching ForBassPlayersOnly.com. I'm John Liebman, founder and first baseman. A lot of people think they're too old or it's too late for them to learn how to play an instrument. So I created ForBassPlayersOnly.com for adults, mostly over 50, who want to learn bass, because I believe you're never too old and it's never too late to experience the joy and the pleasure of making music. ForBassPlayersOnly.com. This is the place to learn bass. Thanks again to Dan Lutz. I will see you all next week, same time, same place, right here at ForBassPlayersOnly.com. In the meantime, let's play bass.